Jin was a horror novel author. That day, she invited Jack, her new close friend, to drink milk tea to listen to him tell weird stories. Jack's village was inherently a secluded place and famous for its spiritual stories. Jack very happily began to tell his story because he had a big cup of milk tea. Let's talk about Jack's village first. It was a small remote village located in the northeast. This place was where Jack used to live all his childhood. The story began with a small quarrel between two women, Hanjin and Pin Lu. The girl with short hair, a fierce face, was Pin Lu. She believed that Hanjin deliberately seduced many men in the area while her husband was away on business. But Hanjin denied it. She said that Pin Lu was deliberately playing bad things to dishonor her. The more she argued, the more furious Pin Lu began to use offensive words against Hanjin. Seeing that, Hanjin's family also advised her to go back, not to pay attention to Pin Lu's words, because arguing in the street only made them embarrassed. Hearing the advice of her family, Hanjin quickly returned home. But before leaving, Hanjin cursed that Pin Lu would have to rot her face and die. However, Pin Lu did not care about that. For some reason, Pin Lu slept very soundly that night and didn't wake up until noon the next day. She also wondered why her husband did not wake her up. Everything in the house was quiet. She walked out the door and didn't see any movement. Very confused, so she decided to open the door and go out to see how it was outside. As soon as she opened the door, a certain liquid stirred from above, causing her to panic. Pin Lu immediately had to scream out of panic. A dead chicken, its head severed and blood pouring from it, was hanging in front of Pin Lu's house. The chicken's head lying in the middle of the blood pool was placed in the middle of the door. The scene was so scary. However, after regaining her composure, Pin Lu, who had a hot temper, immediately thought that it was because Hanjin was playing tricks, so she started to stand in front of the house and howled. But as soon as she spoke, her husband ran up to her from the beginning and stopped her. He told her to be quiet and go into the house. Pin Lu, of course, refused. She insisted on going to Hanjin's house to ask for clarification. At this time, seeing that his wife could not be stopped, the husband informed her with bad news. Last night, Hanjin had taken poison to commit suicide because her husband's family suspected her because of Pin Lu's words. They thought if Hanjin didn't do anything wrong, why would others say that? The husband also said that after Hanjin's death, her family thought that Pin Lu made up the story, so she was humiliated and killed herself like that. This caused trouble for Pin Lu's family. Her husband wanted Pin Lu to stay at home for a while and didn't let them see, or something would happen. The matter was so serious, but Pin Lu still had a bad mouth and doubted Hanjin's death. She assumed that Hanjin was making excuses to make things go smoothly, and if Hanjin was really dead, it had nothing to do with her. The husband also had no way with his wife, urging her to go back inside to smooth things out. If Hanjin's family saw her, they'd probably beat her to death. But in the middle of the night, when her husband was fast asleep, Pin Lu sneaked out. She wanted to see with her own eyes that Hanjin was dead. She went to Hanjin's front door and saw her family members wearing mourning and standing at the door. Still not satisfied, she turned around to the back of the house and saw a large rock placed next to the wall as if calling her to climb. Without hesitation, she climbed up to look inside. After struggling for a long time, she managed to climb to the top. But it was not known whether by coincidence or instigation, but the place she climbed up at the same time was the place where Hanjin's coffin and body were located. Due to suicide by drinking pesticides, Hanjin's face turned black like smoke, looking very unsightly. Hanjin's body, lying still in the coffin, suddenly moved, her eyes wide and bloodshot, looking at Pinlu with hatred. Scared, Pinlu panicked and fell backward, falling off the big rock. She didn't know where her face had hit, but there was a long cut on her cheek that looked like it was painful. But she didn't have time to care about that. She was scared, so she quickly returned to her home. But even in the days that followed, she could not sleep well. Nightmares kept coming to torment her. She always felt Hanjin's eyes staring at her. That made her startle awake and scream in panic, causing her husband to panic and wake up as well. She was sweating profusely now, and her face was full of fear. The wound on her face began to bleed again, drenching her entire face. That made the husband extremely worried because at first the wound was just a shallow wound which stopped the bleeding and healed. He didn't understand why now it was cracked and seemed heavier. But because she thought it was just a small wound, Pinlu also bandaged it up and resumed normal activities. But it was not over yet. In the days that followed, even during the day, Pinlu had to live in fear, because she always felt that Hanjin was watching her from afar. Hanjin's figure kept appearing before her eyes. Sometimes Hanjin hovered and looked at her over the fence wall with an angry expression, as if she wanted to eat Pinlu alive. Panicked, Pinlu threw away the bundle of clothes she was crocheting and ran into the house to hide. That night, Pinlu could not sleep, tossing and turning because of fear. She glanced around to see if Hanjin would appear again. But the strange thing was that the wound on her face became more and more itchy and uncomfortable. She unconsciously scratched the wound with her hand, causing her wound to bleed again, drenching the bandage and soaking it all out. The husband heard his wife's cry and woke up, asking Pinlu what had happened. She cried and panicked and told her husband that her wound was suddenly so itchy that she couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing that his wife was uncomfortable, the husband also helped her remove the bandage to see the wound inside. But as soon as he saw it, her husband panicked. Pinlu's face was disfigured. The wound from the beginning had now begun to seriously ulcerate and rot. Every patch of skin on her cheek was rotting to the point of falling apart. The flesh inside could be seen and even emitting a very foul stench. From that day on, she started going crazy, always saying she saw Hanjin looking at her or attacking her, to the point that her family had to lock her in a warehouse because when she went crazy, she would run around screaming and attack others. She also repeatedly knelt begging Hanjin to spare her life, even though in front of her was devoid of any figure. Everyone assumed that she was crazy, so she was paranoid. One day, her husband brought rice as usual when he found out that she had committed suicide by drinking pesticide. Even her husband didn't know where she ended up getting the potion, but he was sure it was Hanjin's doing. Because before Pinlu died, the husband saw Hanjin, but at that time he thought it was because he was dizzy. That night, the husband was sitting in the house because he was sad, so he drank alone. He then heard his wife's screams coming from the warehouse. Looking in that direction, only a few meters away from the room, he caught a glimpse of a woman's silhouette hovering outside the warehouse window. Wanting to see better, he stood up and opened the window when the figure was gone. At that time, he thought it was because he was looking at it wrong. Jack drank milk tea while telling the story excitedly. Jin also felt that the story was scary. It was right not to offend anyone, or there would be unexpected consequences. Jack said he still had a lot of good stories, so he would slowly tell Jin later. This story happened in a small town in the 1950s. The story was told by my grandmother to my mother. Now my mother told me the story again. At that time, the life of the people in town was very poor. Their ideology was also very backwards. In the village, there was a family surnamed Lu. This family had only one son and one mother. Their life was not difficult, but for some reason, a son got married but couldn't have children. Today, we all know that the reason for no children could be on the husband or the wife. But back then, all responsibility fell on the wife. The daughter-in-law was constantly harassed and tortured by her mother-in-law. Mother-in-law every day saw her daughter-in-law as not pleasing to her eyes. She beat and scolded every little thing and didn't consider her daughter-in-law a person. Because the daughter-in-law couldn't have children, she wanted the daughter-in-law to get a divorce so that her son could get another wife. But rural women at that time never dared to think about divorce. In addition to washing her face with tears, the daughter-in-law could only endure every day. However, the husband was also not a good person. He saw his wife being treated like this, but not only did not know how to comfort her, but also spoke cold words. He listened to his mother and everything followed his mother to mock, punch and brutally abuse his wife. The whole village did not pity the daughter-in-law because the status of a woman at that time was still very low. At that time, my grandmother lived in the same neighborhood as the Liu family. Almost every day my grandmother saw the daughter-in-law's body purple. All were beaten by her mother-in-law and husband. The woman has only been married for a few years, but now her body has deteriorated like that. My grandmother greeted her several times but received no response. My grandmother had a bad premonition in her heart, and she didn't expect it to be the last time my grandmother saw that daughter-in-law, because that night, the daughter-in-law committed suicide by drinking poison. In the morning, when the older woman saw that her annoying daughter-in-law had not woken up, she scolded a few sentences. The older woman did not hear the answer, making her even angrier. But when the older woman opened the door and non-stop cursed, the scene before her eyes made her startled, terrified, and stunned. The daughter-in-law was dead and sprawled on the ground in front of her house. Perhaps the daughter-in-law wanted to go outside the house before she died, but she couldn't because she was heavily poisoned. The frightened older woman thought that her daughter-in-law wanted to haunt her. Witnessing the scary appearance of the daughter-in-law, the older woman in her heart was really scared. From that day on, she didn't know if it was really the soul of the daughter-in-law or not, or because of fear, the woman kept getting sick all the time. Having no choice, the older woman had to invite a shaman from a nearby village to exorcise evil spirits. The older woman remembered and told the shaman about the daughter-in-law who was still alive without children, making her angry all day. The shaman told that as long as the older woman was willing to pay for him, he could solve this problem. After that, he instructed the husband to make a charm to ask for exorcism according to his arrangement, and in 3 days, the shaman would proceed to destroy ghosts. The husband also obeyed. He made 3 long nails and made a big cutting board from an old tree. In the evening, 3 days later, the shaman began to perform the exorcism ritual. The old shaman's method of reassurance used to suppress ghosts and drive away evil spirits was really cruel. The shaman asked her husband to join him and drove large iron nails into the hands of his dead wife. Long iron nails pierced the daughter-in-law's palm and were inserted directly into the thick board. This crucifixion prevented the daughter-in-law's soul from escaping the coffin. A longer iron nail was hammered directly into the daughter-in-law's head, looking very scary. Finally, a heavy cutting board was placed on top of the woman's body so that her soul could never be released again. In this way, a thin wooden coffin was used to place the poor woman's body in it, and it was immediately buried. The daughter-in-law was not placed in the Liu family's ancestral grave, but was buried in an abandoned cemetery to the west of town. After that, the Liu family went around looking for a matchmaker to get a new wife for their son. But finally, the retribution came. After some time, the older woman contracted a strange disease. There was a ringworm on her hand. Not long after, the palm and the back of her hand became sore. In the end, 2 large holes were necrotic, exactly like the nail on the hand of a dead ex-daughter-in-law. She got the pain, itching, and discomfort. The older woman could not stand it anymore, so she gave her son some money and asked him to find a good doctor to visit her home. But the son did not care about the older mother's illness. He took that money to gamble. Usually the older woman managed money so that he couldn't get it. This time, having money was an opportunity for him to run wild. With money in hand, the son continued to plunge into the gambling game. After many times losing to the casino owner, the small amount of money that his mother gave him was quickly exhausted. After dark, he bought some herbs with the rest of the change back home to trick his mother. He even thought that when his mother died, he would be the new owner of the house. But while he was thinking about that, suddenly he tripped and fell down the cliff. He was stabbed through the head by a long tree branch and a large rock pressed on his chest, dying on the spot. He died in a pose like his wife was lying in a coffin made by him. The older woman waited, but did not see her son come back. Her condition got worse. In the end, she died in pain and loneliness. The story took place in 2003 in a small town called Wan'an in Shangpu County, Shangzhou City, Fujian Province, China. During the summer vacation that year, the town cut down an old tree to build the library. This tree was growing in the schoolyard. The big tree was many years old. The tree bark was very thick but did not appear to be a precious tree. The tree trunk was so overgrown that it had to be cut down. When adults were busy with work, naughty kids never lost this joy. After the workers cut down the tree, someone was trying to dig up this giant stump. But the stump was large and so hard to dig up. We took advantage of their digging to find all sorts of things to play with from the tree stump. We were hoping to find something interesting inside the stump. After a few of my friends picked up the silkworms, I was also a bit worried because I didn't know if there was anything else I could pick up. When I saw the deep hole at the tree base, I lay down on the ground and looked inside to see if anything was left. But it was so dark inside I couldn't see anything. I could only reach in with my hands and guess whether there was something in or not. After rummaging around for a while, I finally found something strange in the soil and roots. I secretly hoped it was a good item. I took it out and looked at it. It was a coal black ball and looked very mysterious. It looked like it would be interesting. I thought I had got much better stuff than my friends and their rock. I was afraid that the black ball would be snatched by my friends. Therefore, I didn't say anything to anyone about the coal black ball. I silently picked it up and hid it in my body. We played for a while and it was getting dark. I brought this mysterious black ball home with joy and excitement. My father was working at a fish process factory in town. Every day he worked overtime, and every time he came home late, seeing me bring back the strange ball, my mother blamed me for picking up something so dirty. After eating, I went back to my room to rest. My mother reminded me to take a shower, change my clothes and throw away that dirty black lump. But I didn't expect my nightmare to start from that moment. Really terrible. At 10 o'clock in the evening, it was pitch black outside with no streetlights. The scene became quiet and scary. At this time, my father got home from work. My mother left the food for him and waited for him to come home to eat. My father did not forget to ask my mother if I had gone to bed. My mother also replied that I had long gone to bed after a long day of playing. At that time, the East China Sea also had a lengthy fishing ban. Summer was the peak fishing season. My dad would be very busy. Almost all summer I didn't see him. But on the day when fishing was banned, Dad would be free. My mother and I were used to my father's work arrangement. That day I heard my mother tell me that the night when my father came home and was preparing to eat, my parents heard a loud sound of objects falling from my room. They all thought that I hadn't slept yet. My parents believed that I was naughty in the room. "Looks like our son hasn't slept," my father said. At that time, my mother was a very disciplined and strict person. Hearing noises in the room, my mother wanted to scold me. She got up and went into my room. As soon as she opened the door, she cursed into my room. My mother asked me why I hadn't slept yet but disturbed my father like that. He was eating rice after a busy day. But when my mother opened the door and looked into my room, she was shocked to see the scene before her eyes. My mother said that I wasn't sleeping in my bed but hanging myself from the curtain wire. Because the curtain cord was too tight and blood could not flow through, my face was as white as suffocation and my pupils kept turning white. My father heard my mother's screams and ran to my room immediately. My father screamed in horror when he saw me hanging. Together, the two of them hugged me down from the window. I even didn't realize that because I was unconscious. They put me on the bed and patted my chest and back for a long time. My mother was so scared that she cried a lot. Due to being discovered and rescued in time, I finally woke up. I tried to recall and tell them about a nightmare I had just had, but my mother said that they didn't think they had seen a ghost at that time. They thought I might be sleepwalking or have some sort of psychological problem. But this incident scared both. My parents let me sleep in their room and they watched over me all night. However, that terrible situation did not reappear all night. My parents slowly breathed a sigh of relief. The next day my father went to work again. My mother was worried and did not want me to hang out because what happened to me last night still scared her very much. But I could feel that I was perfectly fine. I didn't feel comfortable at home. I wanted to meet a classmate, so I asked my mother's permission to go out. My mother told me to remember to come back soon. I ran to the square in the center of town with a close school friend. We laughed and talked a lot with each other. For more than 1 hour I had fun with my friends. My mother washed clothes and prepared everything without me and my father. Suddenly a friend who was playing with me came to my house and told my mother that something had happened to me. And he told my mother about the horrible experience I had outside. My friend said I was almost hanged and was being taken to the clinic. At that time I was taken to the clinic in town. My mother ran there with my classmate. As soon as I entered the clinic, my mother saw me lying on the hospital bed in an unconscious state. My mother later recounted that I had a deep knot on my neck at that time. My blood was oozing out a lot. I had suffered severe blood loss. The doctor said that fortunately I was treated in time. It was not life-threatening. My breathing and heart rate were normal, but somehow I was still unconscious. Both my mother and the doctor felt that my problem was not simple, so they asked a friend who played with me what went on. My friend said what just happened was scary. We encountered a ghost, and that ghost almost killed me. My friend told them that we played games together in the gym area of the street park in the morning. They suddenly saw me walking to the woods in the park alone. My friends didn't know why I was acting so weird. They all thought I found something hilarious inside. 2 of my friends followed me and went into the forest, but my friends saw me standing under a big tree. They called me twice, but I didn't answer. Instead, I started climbing to the top of the big tree without a sound. They called me several more times, but I still didn't answer. They stood below to see what I would do when I climbed the tree. But my friends saw that besides me there was another terrible thing in the tree that made them shocked. It was a female ghost wearing a red dress. The ghost looked hideous and scary. That female ghost was holding my hand and pulling me up the tree. After I was pulled up the tree, the female ghost hung me with a prepared noose on a tree branch. I didn't know why I didn't have any struggle or resistance at the time. The female ghost disappeared after hanging me. I was strangled and stuck out my tongue right after. My friends who witnessed the incident quickly screamed and called for the adults nearby to save me and take me to the medical station. At first, my mother and the doctor did not believe my friend's description, but the doctor took my hand and found a dark handprint on my wrist. This made them believe what my friend said. Then the doctor also found the mysterious black ball that I was holding in my hand. After learning that this ball was picked up from under the tree, the doctor recognized the problem. He was equally alarmed. The doctor said that maybe this ball was made up of the resentment of the person who hanged himself after death, and it lay on the soil under the body of the hangman. About what the doctor said, I also checked it myself. It was also recorded in the medical record of the medical examiner. Later, when my father heard the news, he ran into the hospital to visit me and was instructed to burn the other black ball in the garden with a peach branch. As soon as my dad burned it, I hadn't been hanged for any reason since. Everything was back to normal. The formation of a black ball in the soil at the feet of a dead person by hanging has not been scientifically proven, but there were many records such as Xingyu Lu and other ancient books. I felt lucky. I received the offer to join a well-known advertising firm after an interview. It was also where I experienced something terrifying later. It was the first day of my internship that day. When I arrived at the company, I was directed to the general manager's office, where he greeted me and complimented me on an excellent interview. The GM of this company was really young, handsome, and was known as King of Diamonds. The GM assigned me to the project inventory department, mainly doing some sorting and document editing. After explaining the job, the HR manager came to lead me to my workplace. When we came to the department, he showed me where to work and told me to get to know people around. The table had been cleared, and it seemed that there had been no staff sitting at that position for a long time. Seeing a new colleague, people around started to notice me. At this moment, I felt that everyone's expression was a bit unfriendly. Their attitude didn't seem to be cheerful when I appeared. The female colleague told me that it would be better for me to offer to change the working position. It turned out that the owner of this desk was Lisa, who committed suicide by jumping off the company building. But I didn't care about this matter, because she and I did not know each other. I just felt worried a bit because I didn't think people would greet me in this way. In the company, I noticed that there was a man sitting next to me who seemed unapproachable. His name was Tom. I found out many times that he was secretly peeking at me, which made me feel so uncomfortable. Also, Tom was usually very shady, and his nasty temper was evident on his face, which made me try to minimize contact with him. A week later, I was called in to work overtime for drafting bidding paperwork for a new corporate project. I was the last one remaining in this vast, desolate office. This was my first project. Succeed or failure of this project would determine whether the firm would keep me. Fortunately, all of the supplies had been pre-prepared, so it wasn't too tough for me. I took a sip of coffee and sat back in my chair, seeing that the bidding paperwork was nearly finished. I went by the windows, wanted to enjoy the night scenery outside and rest my tired eyes. A breeze of cold air rushed in as soon as the windows opened, making me feel quite calm. But then, a dark shadow appeared in front of me, falling down at a breakneck pace. Even though it was just for a split second, that figure passed me and dropped below. I instantly pushed my head out and glanced down. I was terrified, but there was nothing odd down there. My heart was still racing. I could tell that I saw someone falling from the building just now. Then I returned to my seat and deliberately placed my palm on my forehead. I was reclining back in my chair. All out of a sudden, the office lights went out. My computer screen went black at the same time. I instantly leaped out of my chair, knowing that the bidding paperwork I had been working on earlier had not been saved, and that if the computer crashed, the entire night's effort would be gone. So I checked from the top to the bottom, and this time it was really gone. The power in this building had been turned off. Suddenly the screen just switched on. Even worse, a video began auto-playing on the screen. This video scenario seemed quite familiar. Wasn't this my office? The video feed was zoomed in and finally mirrored on a desk. This desk resembled mine. But the woman at the table wasn't me. She was a total stranger who was typing in front of the computer and appeared to be working hard and concentrated. But then two arms appeared from behind her, covering her lips and pulling her back. According to this force, the woman was taken aback and leaned back. Then she fell down on the floor. The woman's legs were continually straining in the next shot. After a few minutes, the woman was able to release herself. She bolted in the direction of the camera, her clothing strewn, and in a panic. At that moment, the video screen was jammed. The camera frame went back and showed the top floor of the office building, where the woman was being pushed towards the rooftop railing by someone. Her expression was filled with terror, and she implored the guy. However, the person who was tormenting her was still unable to be seen clearly. That man approached cautiously, but she gave up and leaped down below at that point. The man or person didn't appear to anticipate the woman to be so rash. He went over after the woman jumped down and peered down below. At this point, the man's face emerged clearly in the camera. It was the general manager. And I couldn't believe my eyes. The murderer in the video was really him. What was more unexpected was his remarkable serene look. The screen then returned to its previous state of noise, but the computer let out a horrible wail. I jumped out of the chair, startled and now in panic. But what was even worse was that when I glanced up, there was already a person seated on my chair. She was the woman in the video right now. The woman's eyes were transfixed to the computer screen, tears as crimson as blood streaming down her face, her body and clothing stained in blood. Too terrified, I ran to the door with all my strength. However, when I arrived at the entrance, I was unable to open the office's glass door. The wail behind was becoming louder, piercing my heart, and I was sweating profusely. My legs were mushy, and as I clutched the glass door handle, my entire body trembled. A person arrived outside the door in the middle of my anguish. It was Tom, but he didn't gaze at me, tears in his eyes instead. He was staring straight into the office. The odd thing was that when Tom yanked on the door handle, the glass door instantly opened as if it had never been locked. A breeze blasted out of the room at the moment Tom opened the door. Both Tom and I stared at the desk at the same moment. The woman had left, the chair was vacant, and the drapes were only faintly swaying. Tom eventually returned to face me at this moment and said, "What happened? Wasn't Lisa just here?" When he said that he had just seen Lisa, I informed him that it was true that I had just met Lisa. "She also showed me a video on my computer of her leaping from the building and the CEO murdering her," I added. When Tom heard this, he dashed over to my computer. That a video was saved on my computer desktop, and the video substance was identical to what I just viewed, which shocked Tom. The next day, using the video as proof, the company's GM was arrested. He was accused of causing Lisa's death after being sexually harassed by him. Later, I discovered that Lisa was Tom's lover, despite the fact that they had only known each other for a month. Tom seemed to have lost his enthusiasm in work and life after discovering that Lisa committed suicide. That night I met Lisa. Tom was depressed. He was smoking in front of the company. When he noticed the office lights were turned off and a scream was heard, he took it as a terrible omen and raced up to see what was going on. The cops were baffled as to who made the video. However, there was no evidence of editing in the video material, leaving the general manager unable to resist when questioned and forced to lower his head to admit. I worked as a ranger, so most of my days were spent in the jungle. I was driving to work in the company car and began measuring and photographing until late in the evening, after which I would return home. Chen, an unmarried middle-aged man, was the driver of my company. Shen drove me and my colleague to work as usual, set a timer to pick us up and quickly drove away. However, the sky was beginning to darken at the foot of the mountain today, and Chen had yet to come back, causing me and my colleague great concern. My colleague waited in rage because if it got dark, getting out of this forest would be dangerous because the road was very rough. The car arrived after the sun had completely set. Of course, my colleague and I were both exhausted. As my colleague carried his belongings to the car, he irritated the driver by being slow and late for his appointment. My colleague then sat next to the driver. Instead of apologizing for what he had done, this driver simply explained that he had a reason for picking us up so late. However, my colleague's reaction was one of curiosity rather than sympathy. Seeing this, the driver offered to buy this colleague a meal as an apology and promised to tell him the incident that caused him to be late. That evening, the driver drove my colleague to his home and ate a simple meal. His mother brought out a large plate of food from the kitchen. Because both of them had to work the next day, so they couldn't drink much, just ate a simple meal with a bit of wine. At the start of the meal, the colleague inquired of the driver as to why he went to the forest so late today. The driver stated that he had been driving early, but on the way he came across a beautiful girl and assisted her. He was driving to the edge of the forest at the time. However, on the way he was unexpectedly met by a person standing in front of his car. The driver rushed over and saw a young girl beckoning him with a towel, but she was alone, as if she was lost. What struck him about this girl was the white handkerchief she used to call him, and she appeared to be a girl from a recluse and traditional family living in the forest. He couldn't leave a young girl being alone like that in the jungle, so he went over to her, stopped the car in front of her, and inquired about her situation. The young girl approached the driver gently and asked if he could drive her to her house because she was lost and couldn't find her way home. Seeing such a lovely young lady, the driver couldn't help but invite her to his car and ask for her address so that he could bring her home as soon as possible. After showing the driver the way, the two sat happily chatting side by side. The girl's young feminine beauty quickly captivated the driver, making him a little enamored. According to the young lady's instructions, the driver finally could take her home on the trail that led to the forest's end. She also told the driver that she was worried when leaving her mother at home alone. This made the driver even more smitten with the young lady. He couldn't take his eyes off her face. He kept looking at her and was always being caught by her. After a while, the driver also dropped her off in a residential area surrounded by vast fields where she could walk home. After that, the young girl went into her house, but the driver continued to keep an eye on her figure. He discovered that she had left items in his car. It was her white handkerchief. Perhaps she was in a hurry, so she forgot it on the chair. Because he was still busy with work and believed that this handkerchief was a predestined sign that would allow him to see the young girl again, he decided to keep it so that the next day he would have a reason to see her again. Hearing this, my colleague became excited, smiled happily at the driver and promised to accompany him the next day. As usual, the driver arrived early the next morning to pick up the colleague, and the two of them set off together. The driver was supposed to take this colleague to the other girl's house first, according to the original plan. However, I was in the car, making the two of them feel hampered. When the other colleague noticed this, he immediately discussed with the driver leaving me in the forest and then go to the girl's house to return the handkerchief to her. That day, I had to work alone in the forest, and the two of them returned to the old road to get to the girl's house. Upon arrival in the residential area, my colleague went to ask the neighbors for the girl's exact address. According to the description, the two eventually found a neighbor who knew the young girl's address and was eager to accompany them. The girl's house was at the far end of the village, and the outside was deafeningly quiet. The two came up to the door and boldly knocked. After a while, the girl's mother emerged from the house and inquired as to what they were looking for. They both said, "Come here to return the items to the girls in the house." However, this mother did not allow the two to enter the house and loudly chased them away because she suspected the two were imposters. When my colleague felt the situation was very strange, he immediately blocked the door and insisted on entering the house to meet the girl, but his aggressive demeanor frightened the elderly mother even more. According to the mother, these two were the impersonating scammers. The driver only recently confirmed that he was the one who brought this girl home yesterday. However, the mother did not believe it and even insisted that such a strange thing could not happen. When the driver noticed this, he immediately took out the girl's handkerchief to show her mother. When the mother saw the handkerchief, she immediately changed her attitude. Her face was a little sorrowful, and she inquired as to why the two of them had the handkerchief. After that, the mother invited these two men into the house, where they were surprised to discover the truth. The mother offered the two some drinks and thanked them for bringing the handkerchief back because it belonged to her deceased daughter. She couldn't hide her emotion as she looked at her child's handkerchief, breaking down in tears when she remembered her poor daughter. She stated that her daughter was in the forest a few days ago when she unintentionally stepped on a landmine and she could not survive. The villagers discovered the girl's charred black body, but she couldn't close her eyes with peace because she didn't have her handkerchief. With the discovery of her daughter's handkerchief, the mother could finally use it to cover her daughter's disfigured face in the coffin and bury her. After telling the truth, the mother also sent the two men on the road late at night. The two of them left with a great concern about the fact that Chen had met the girl's spirit in the forest. After that, my colleague also forgot about it. He and I set out for the forest the next morning, but he refused to let me take the same bus that day. When the colleague saw the driver's emaciated appearance as he was getting into the car, he expressed concern. Didn't know why his face became so haggard after only one night. He immediately recounted how he had trouble sleeping that night before when he dreamt that the spirit of the dead girl came to demand to bring him to hell. The girl appeared with her body covered in blood and worms, looked at the sleeping man and touched his face with her hand. He could feel the coldness of the girl's dead body, especially when her hand was passionately caressing him. The man awoke immediately and stayed awake all night because he was too terrified. Seeing this, my colleague tried to calm him down, ensuring him that nothing would happen. That day, the car and my co-driver unexpectedly rushed down the abyss and burst into flames. As we age, our appearances as well as bodies lose vitality, but many people refuse to admit it. The following story occurred in a small northern city, and the main character was a widow named Sun. Despite the fact that her husband died at a young age, Sun remained very strong. She had worked very hard to support her family and always wished to see her two children grow up. However, Sun was very lonely as her two children married and had their own families. They were also busy with work and had little time to visit her. They also rarely brought their children to visit her, though they frequently sent her money, which couldn't compensate for the void in her heart. Sun had also tried playing cards and traveling with a few close friends like everyone else, but this wasn't what she truly desired. Sun went out shopping today. She was walking down the street when she noticed a very familiar young man walking in front of her. She took a quick step forward and turned her head to look, finally catching a glimpse of his face. This person resembled her late husband. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the strange man who looked exactly like her husband, so she quietly followed behind him. Sun inquired of a student standing in front of the school gate whether he attended the same school as the other young man.
Yes, that's Kai, the best student in our school.
When Sun knew that the young man's name was Kai, she fell in love with him at first sight. However, as Kai became aware of Sun's tracking, he decided to deviate from his usual daily route. When Sun no longer saw Kai walking down those streets, she knew he'd realized he was being followed. Sun sighed every time she looked in the mirror at her wrinkled face, convinced that she was aging rapidly. Sun brought a sad mood that day. After eating, she went for a walk, unexpectedly bumping into Kai, making her feel a little embarrassed. Sun walked away quickly, thinking of the meeting just now. Her heart felt both happy and sad, mixed and intertwined. San ran fast for a long distance because she was still embarrassed. Kai was nowhere to be found when she turned her head to look back. San was still looking in his direction with a disappointed expression on her face when she turned her head and noticed a strange man standing right next to her. As if he could see through San's mind, this man asked her if she wanted to enter an official relationship with that person she secretly loved. When she noticed the strange man saying strange things, She tried to walk away, but was stopped by him. He wanted her to listen to what he was about to say. The man then took out a small bottle and handed it to Sun, explaining that it was called youth glue, and that simply applying it to her face would restore her youthful appearance. As if by magic, Sun subconsciously took the small bottle of youth glue. But then Sun appeared to awaken. She reacted as if she wanted to refuse, but the man had vanished. Sun wanted to throw away the strange little bottle, but she reconsidered. If this thing could truly restore her youth, she would give it a shot. When she got home, she anxiously took out the bottle, which contained a substance that was no different from regular glue except for the stamp written youth glue. She felt cheated because she had never heard of anyone applying glue to their faces and making them look younger, like an 18-year-old girl. But when she thought of Kai, then of that mysterious man, it was as if she were possessed by a demon, and a voice in her head urged her to use this glue as soon as possible. Sun couldn't resist the temptation and applied glue to her face before going to bed. She used up the entire bottle of glue. Sun felt cool and relaxed after applying it to her face, and she promptly fell asleep. It was only early in the morning. Sun couldn't wait to get up and look in the mirror as soon as she opened her eyes. Sun was taken aback when she saw herself in the mirror for the first time. She became younger and had regained her youthful appearance.
Wow!
Sun happily went out after changing clothes, looking forward to meeting Kai to express her feelings, and everyone on the street looked at her admiringly, making her very happy. There had even been some young men who had asked for Sun's contact information, but she rejected them all. So she went to Kai's school every day to meet him. She successfully caught Kai's attention, and they gradually got to know each other. Then she and Kai became lovers, as she wished for. Kai's appearance reminded her of her late husband every single time they met. Today, the two of them were out on the street shopping when her phone rang. Sun took it out and saw that it was her son calling. Sun hurriedly ran to another location to answer the phone, and Kai noticed that she appeared to be hiding something. After Sun hung up the phone, Kai inquired about the conversation. When Sun looked at Kai, she realized she couldn't tell the truth, so she devised a way to avoid it. Though everything would be alright, but recently, her son and daughter had been calling Sun alternately, making it difficult for her to explain to Kai each time. It turned out that because her appearance had changed, she didn't dare to meet her children, so she always made excuses not to see them. Her children were worried about their mother but were busy with work, so they could only care for her by calling her via phone. However, Kai was suspicious due to recent frequent phone calls. But every time Sun tried to avoid his question, Kai clearly didn't believe it any longer. To assuage his suspicions, she intercepted her children's phone calls whenever she left the house and spent money hiring young people to perform as her friends. But it didn't last long. After 3 months, the wrinkles on her face reappeared, and one day when she woke up, she had the appearance of an elderly woman. Kai was now calling her frequently, but Sun was afraid to respond, not knowing how to face him. Sun walked around the streets and alleys every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of her lover from afar. Just as she was about to give up, the mysterious man who had given her a bottle of youth glue appeared. She shed tears of joy when she saw that man, but the mysterious man did not take the youth glue out to give it to her, but instead made a request to her. Sun paused when he told her she had to trade her life. Sun was told to think twice about it after the mysterious man explained it to her. Sun thought about Kai and her husband who died young, so she was unconcerned about the consequences and accepted to trade youth glue from the man. She then reverted to her youthful beauty and returned to Kai once more. The two then rekindled their beautiful love, dreaming of a sweet home. But it didn't take long. This time the glue's effect lasted only a month before it faded, even though she looked much older than the last time. When she looked at her old face, she realized that the mysterious man meant if she kept using the glue, she would really die one day. Finally, Sun, unable to resist the desire of youth and love, set out to find the mysterious man. But before that, when she happened to run into Kai on the street, her elderly appearance clearly failed to make Kai recognize that the old woman in front of him was his lover. Sun's heart was broken as she looked at Kai's back. This time, Sun could easily meet the mysterious man. He continued to give Sun a new youth glue bottle after Sun determined that she would continue to use glue. However, the glue's effect lasted only a week this time. Sun finished from Kai for the third time a week later. Kai couldn't find her no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't until his son returned home that he discovered she had died. Sun's death appearance was strange. Her entire body transformed into a mummy, and she opened her mouth as if calling for something. Which would you choose? Health, youth, love, life, or family? The peaceful village became busier than usual that morning. People reported to the police early on, and they quickly arrived here to investigate a case that occurred. According to the person who reported the crime, the murder took place in the house directly ahead. The police department blocked the crime scene quickly. Boss Lu Feng and Captain Chow also put on gloves in preparation for an inspection. They were very attentive around the room from the moment they entered the door, because all murder cases would have clues from the surrounding objects. Boss Lu Feng commended the captain to split up to investigate. He would go inside while the captain checked around the house. Captain Chow examined the scene carefully, but there were almost no hints, so he returned inside the house to report to Boss Lu Feng. But the scene in front of him, that was both heartbreaking and frightening. On the ceiling right now was a woman who appeared to have hanged herself, and there was an odd detail. On her feet, she was wearing a pair of red shoes that were very intricately embroidered. Whereas her family was an ordinary farmer family who dressed very simple. Boss Lu Feng immediately called the person who reported the case to ask for clarification. Boss Lu Feng was curious as to how he was able to discover the body inside this house. Because the door was locked, it was difficult to see inside. He stated that he was always watching because he had a crush on the victim and he had not seen her leaving the house since a few days, so he was concerned. As a result, he leaned out the door to inspect the inside. While looking for the girl, he was discovered by two of her relatives. They thought he was a thief, so they confiscated him to get clarification. However, after explaining that he was concerned about the girl, he peered inside to see how she was doing. Her relatives were concerned after not seeing her for 2 days and came here to find out what had happened. When her uncle opened the door and walked inside, he panicked and was screaming while rushing out the room. Only then people rushed in to learn that the girl had hanged herself. After hearing him explain, Boss Lu Feng temporarily believed him and ordered the police to bring her body down. And didn't forget to instruct them to be cautious and keep the body in its current state for forensic examination. The girl's body was then carried out, ready to be returned to the police station. She was still wearing a pair of red shoes embroidered with red flowers. However, an elderly woman in the crowd was watching, and when she saw the girl's body, she panicked and her face was darkened. Because of her abnormal appearance, Boss Lu Feng began to keep an eye on her. The entire team met at the headquarters to investigate the case. Was it true that the girl committed suicide? and the people who were intimately involved were also the ones who discovered the girl's body. The boss directed to investigate all the people who were close to the girl, including the man who followed her. Captain Chow dashed out the door to inform everyone in a rush. They could find out the reason for the girl's death. The odd thing was that it could be related to previous hanging cases that happened. Captain Chow believed that these cases are out of the ordinary. "Sir, I believe this case was connected to a curse." Boss Lu Feng was taken aback. "Another witchcraft case?" Captain Chow explained to his boss what he had learned from the elderly woman who had reacted strangely the day before as soon as they started to go back to the crime scene. Before that, there was a girl in the village whose husband died young and was unable to work hard, so she chose to sleep with men to earn money. But she was discovered by a woman in the village. They came to beat her and scratched her face in order to prevent her from seducing men in the future. They shaved her hair and ruined her face, then abandoned her in the middle of the street. She then hanged herself in her house. She was already dead when people found her, and she was wearing the same red embroidered shoes which appeared at the crime scene recently. She seemed to die unjustly, so she left a curse on the wall. "If I become a ghost, I will return for revenge." All of the participants who abused the girl were terrified of the ghost's vengeance. Indeed, each of them committed suicide by hanging themselves. Especially when they die, on their feet were the red embroidered shoes that the girl wore when she died. Boss Lu Feng didn't believe this was the work of the devil. As a result, he directed the captain to look into the relatives of the girls who committed suicide to see if there were any leads. He reasoned that this could have been arranged by the girl's relatives. When she died, they might have exacted their vengeance on her behalf. After a day of investigation, the most suspicious person was the husband of the recently deceased girl. He used to sleep with the girl who was beaten by his wife. He was also the person next to his wife when she committed suicide. As a result, he was immediately taken back to the station to obtain a bow. He initially just played around and pretended not to be related to the case, but when Captain Chow became enraged, he was then obeyed to tell everything. He stated that he did not murder anyone. It was because the other girl's ghost appeared in the middle of the night and murdered his wife. His wife woke up in the middle of the night while sleeping and went off to bed. Despite the fact that he called, she did not answer. Suddenly he noticed a pair of red shoes floating in mid-air in front of his wife, and his wife was staring at them unconsciously. The shoes then moved as if inviting his wife to put them on. And, as being hypnotized, she wore them on her feet. She then began to get out of bed. He was so terrified that he couldn't move. All he could do was call out her name, which didn't work. His wife approached a wooden plank on the ceiling that a piece of cordage was tied on since. And then came what may, she began to fly up, floating in mid-air and approaching the cordage. And with that, she flew closer to the rope. Then she put her head in the noose. He was shocked when he saw his wife die so quickly before he could react. By the time his wife was hanged, he was about to take her down. Suddenly, a wooden chair appeared out of nowhere, striking him in the face, making him dizzy. Then, panicked, he looked in the direction of the chair. The sight in front terrified him. All of the furniture in the house was floating upwards. He was terrified to death after seeing that, and because the wound on his face was so painful, he stopped paying attention to his wife. As a result, he fled from home, unconcerned about whether his wife was dead or alive. He finally had the courage to return with a few villagers in the next morning. The interrogation was finished, and both Captain and Boss Lu Feng believed he wasn't the murderer. But what he said was unreal. They needed more concrete evidence. The two of them then went to the cemetery where the victim's body was buried to look for any clues. When they arrived at the location, they both sought out the cemetery keeper to inquire about the grave. This cemetery guard turns out to be the man who snooped in front of the girl's house the day he discovered her suicide. He agreed to lead everyone to a grave after a few inquiries. And Boss Lu Feng didn't forget to ask if anything out of the ordinary had happened recently. He also talked a lot about the girl along the way, but all of those clues were already investigated by the police. But there was one strange thing. He pointed to the girl's grave and inquired whether the cops had seen anything. Captain Chow simply stated that the grave was typical. However, Boss Lu Feng, who has extensive experience, discovered something unusual. He sat down slowly and picked up a cake that was being offered at the grave, and he informed Captain Chow that this cake was strange. Because this type of cake was only available in the neighboring village, the police had asked all of the girl's relatives not to leave the village while the case was being investigated. As a result, Captain Chow began investigating the cake's origins right away. He eventually discovered the only shop that sold this type of cake. Boss Lu Feng and the captain dressed casually and went to the site to look for more clues. However, the vending cart did not pique the interest of Boss Lu Feng, but the theater behind it with a large billboard made him feel more likely to find clues in it. There was a billboard outside the theater advertising a well-known magician. The show was taking place inside. Captain Chow was told by Boss Lu Feng to keep an eye on the magician. The two entered. The show had begun. Boss Lu Feng had a hunch that this magician had a problem. The magician started to greet everyone before performing a few small tricks. Then came today's most expected performance. It was about being able to make people and objects levitate. He managed to levitate all of his gadgets, including his co-star. Captain Chow was taken aback and jumped up, as the method was similar to that of the Red Shoes case. Boss Lu Feng advised him to be more cautious and keep an eye out for this magician in order to avoid waking a sleeping dog. The two people waited for him until he finished his performance. Seeing the presence of the cops, he also obediently put his hands in the handcuffs. He had no intention of covering up his crime at the police station, knowing that everything had been exposed. He maintained a calm demeanor while speaking. He admitted everything. He did it because he loved the girl and wanted all the others to suffer and pay for what they did. After that, he continued that those victims deserved to die, and that it was simply a poetic justice. In the end, he was sentenced to death for the murder of 3 people. Boss Lu Feng speculated that he committed such a crime because he was too enamored with the victim. A few years ago, I opened a small photography shop on a street corner. Although the business was not very crowded, it also brought me a stable source of income. Every morning, I brought new photos taking to hang outside the store to advertise and attract customers. However, the following days I sat at the counter, yawned, and waited for customers, but still, no one came. One weekend, the doorbell at my shop rang. That was the first customer who came to my shop to take pictures after a sluggish week. I looked at her. It was a young woman with a slim figure, and her face was also very pretty. I asked how the photo shoot was that she needed. This young woman was in no hurry to answer. Her slightly sad face looked at me, mixed with a little awkwardness that made me curious. I invited her to follow me deep into the set to briefly refer to the scenes and choose the right photography style. What surprised me the most was the decisive and cold answer of the female customer. She said she wanted me to take her photo like a worship photo. I looked at her in surprise, not sure if I heard wrong or not. Because if she was young, taking pictures of worship so early was an omen of bad luck and taboo that no one dared to do. I hesitated at first, hoping she would change her mind, but this girl was very determined. She really wanted me to take a worship photo. To please the customer, I reluctantly took her inside. As I walked, a strange idea flashed in my mind based on the suggestion of this female customer. I could open a deaf experience photography service. It sounded a bit weird, but it was also suitable for young people. But that eccentric thought was quickly forgotten when this female client and I went to the portrait picture room for the elderly. There was only one small chair in the middle of the room, and around many large light catch lamps. I invited this female customer inside and sat on the chair to prepare to take pictures. I purposefully avoided taboo by telling her to sit in front of the white font, like taking a card photo, but she refused and said she wanted to be photographed in the original form according to a standard worship photo. Knowing that I could not persuade the strange female customer, I immediately followed her advice. I brought the small chair to the blue background at the back of the room and prepared my camera to start shooting. I tried to focus, and my eyes fixed on the small lens. This girl's face showed tension, nervousness, and sadness inexplicably. To relieve her tension, I gently told this girl to smile, but it didn't work. Her expression remained as gloomy as when she first entered my photography shop. I helped her take a few more pictures so she could choose the best one. I guess she was overly stressed about the photo shoot, so I tried to reassure her. After more than half an hour of simple photography, the shoot was finally over. I quickly informed this female customer and asked her to come back here the next day to receive pictures. Her photo would be finished by about the following noon. She softly uttered 2 words, "Thank you," and then gave me a gentle smile. It was the only smile on a beautiful face since the morning. I carefully sent her out. I walked close to her so I could feel the cold emanating from her pale, slender body. She didn't say goodbye to me but just looked straight ahead and gently walked out. Her enigmatic silence puzzled me greatly. That night I remembered the returning photos appointment for the only female customer this morning, so I worked on the pictures until the middle of the night. But strangely enough, the pictures taken of the girl in the morning were all wrong. I tried to hold the photo in my hand, shined it under the lamp and looked closely, but could not find any clues to what damaged them. All photos taken of this girl were blurred, not clear, and out of focus. Although, when I took the photo, I focused very carefully. I guess the problem was most likely in the reels that I shot, but no matter how much I searched, I found this reel to be perfectly normal and without any problems. That made me feel even more strange when I looked at the photo of the female customer in the morning. To fix it, I had to take a photo again, but that was completely impossible. I scratched my head awkwardly, trying to figure out how to explain when I had to give her pictures tomorrow. The next day she showed up on time. She was still wearing yesterday's red dress, but her face looked haggard and sharper. When the girl just came in front of me, I saw some dark bruises on her already beautiful face, which made me even more curious about the real life of this mysterious girl. She quickly asked me about the photo. Before the impatience to receive her photo, I felt extremely awkward and guilty. I didn't know how to explain it to her. The two of us fell into deep thought, unable to say another word. The girl always stared at me with expectant eyes, and I stayed silent. I slowly walked to the place that kept her pictures. My eyes couldn't leave her for even a second. Then I took the photo and put it on the table, mouth faltering. I tried to explain to her that there was a problem in the process of editing her picture, so I asked her if she could take another picture or not. She did not rush to answer my request, just calmly staring at the photo with sad eyes. The most amazing thing was that she didn't blame me for my skills, nor did she ask me to take a picture again. She said I framed it for her picture. I was happy to do that, immediately negotiating the frame size. After making sure, this girl asked me to take the picture from back to her house, and she would give me the money. Her offer to me was not too difficult, so I readily accepted. After doing as she said, I followed her home. She gently walked ahead, and I calmly bought the picture frame behind. She took me through quite a distance, even crossing the highway, which made me a little surprised and confused. After a while, the two of us exited the main road and went to the edge of the forest. At that time, I felt a bit weird. I suspected this girl had bad intentions, so I raised my voice. Faced with my suspicions, she looked very calm. She reassured me, saying that her house was only a few 100 meters away. I agreed to follow her for a shorter distance. Arriving at an empty lot, she pointed to a large mound of dirt on the side of the road and told me to put a picture frame on it. I was surprised, thinking that she was joking with me, so I kept asking her again to verify if there were any houses in this deserted place. But the answer I got from her was always denial. This strange girl insisted that her house was on that mound and told me to put the picture on there for her. I seemed to have run out of patience. A whole day of walking was exhausting and it took no time to look after the shop, so I got angry and rushed to grab her shoulders. Only then did I feel the strangeness of this female client's body. As soon as I touched her, her flesh immediately seemed to cling to my hand and disintegrate. I was startled. I pulled my hand back to take a look and saw that the flesh on her shoulder was clinging to my hands. I shivered, slowly raising my eyes to look at the strange girl in front of me. That's right. The place where my hand was placed appeared a large hole as if it was gangrene. I gently stepped back, unable to fully articulate the identity verification question I wanted to ask her. When she saw my panic, she burst into tears and complained that her whole body was itchy and uncomfortable. But no matter where she scratched, I could hear the flesh falling right there. Her whole body was now white, her eyes were lifeless and crazy, her whole body gave off a foul smell like a corpse. After that, everywhere her fingers went, a row of tender, sagging meat looked horrible. I realized this customer was a ghost, so I screamed and ran away. I followed the trail and found my way out of the jungle. I ran to the police station to report this customer's story, and from there I also found a lot of information. As it turned out, she was a female student at a famous university in the city. It was also located near my photography shop. We went to her dorm and learned that her friends hadn't seen her for a few months. The police immediately contacted the family and immediately determined this to be a disappearance. From the clues and evidence collected from the police, the culprit was also captured. He was a guy who dated the schoolgirl. The two met each other through social media and moved in together for a while. Because he saw her asking for a breakup, he turned his love into hatred, killed her, and buried her body in this mound of wasteland. Since that time, my shop had also become more gloomy and empty. Seeing that the business was not very good, I had to close the shop and find myself another job to do.